and what a great day to sew something wonderful. I'm Kia with Kia Bee, and today we're going to be working on a fun little project that is an iPad cover, or you can use it as a book cover, or really whatever you would like to throw in this little adorable bag. As you can tell, I have used scrap leftover half square triangles, and I absolutely love these. They make the cutest little bag. And so I've put my iPad in there, and with that I have put some protective lining actually in the bag that gives it some type of cushion, and that way my iPad doesn't get damaged while it's in there. So let's talk about the materials that you'll need for this project. First thing first, this is a charm friendly pattern, and so I've just decided to use this really cute charm pack from Rifle Paper Company. And that's always such a mouthful for me. But it's got just these really adorable little floral prints in them. I've used this before in a project a few weeks ago as I was making a baby quilt for my niece. And I love these. And so I'm going to make my book cover out of that. You will also need some background 5-inch squares as well. I'm going to choose to use gray. I just think it's a really nice contrasting color for this colorway of the charm pack. So you'll need a few 5-inch charms from that. And really, out of one charm pack, you can get several bags or cases. So, I mean, even if you have just a few leftover charms in your scrap pile, pull those out. You can do this a very scrappy look. It'll be very cute either way. Then you'll need a lining fabric, a binding fabric, and a pocket fabric. Now, I haven't quite decided which is going to be which yet. I know this will be my lining fabric, this red and white stripe, but I'm just not sure whether I want this scrap fabric here to be my binding. It's such a cute pink gingham, and then the yellow as my pocket. I haven't really decided yet, so I guess I will decide when we get to that part. The other technical things that you'll need for the bag or the case, whichever you're making it for, you can use any type of batting. Because I originally made this for my iPad, I wanted something a little more thick. So I'm going to be using that as well again today. The friend that I'm making this for, she's going to use it for her books that she reads, but eventually she may use it for something else. So I want the stability in there. This is just a really thin foam that I can sew into and give it some protection. Like I said, you can use cotton batting or polyester, whatever type of kind of interfacing or stabilizer that you would like to use. The other things that you'll need are just your rotary mat, your ruler, and your rotary blade, and then obviously your sewing machine and coordinating thread. So let's get started and take this one stitch at a time. So let's look at the specifics of this case before we cut our fabric and start going. I have chosen to use leftover half square triangles, and those are from when I dog ear something. I save the triangles. Remember, I showed you in a video before that I sewed that extra line, and these are all leftover triangles from that. And so so we're going to be making this as our piecing, but then this is our lining, okay? And it's got a nice binding right here, and that kind of finishes this raw edge. If I take my iPad out here, I like my iPad to fit really snug in there, so I made the measurements exactly to be like that. And then inside you've got a nice lining with finished edges on, let me see if you can see it, there we go, with finished edges on the inside. And then, so we've got our whole piecing of back here. When you flip it over, that's our pocket. So you could continue your piecing to be here on the pocket. I just like the contrasting fabric. It kind of takes away from the busyness of the bag, but it's totally up to you. Now, sizing is totally up to you. I have an iPad Pro, and so my measurement for this bag is at 10.5 inches, completely finished from side to side. If it's folded over, it is at about 7 3/4 inches folded over. If I unfold it, it is at 13.5 inches. So that makes this nice little fold over, so I can throw this in my purse, in my homeschool bag, or in my quilting bag, whatever I'm doing. I can kind of use it for that. So, first thing first, if you don't have scrap squares already made from your triangles, let's go ahead and grab a charm pack. Like I said, this is from Rifle Paper Company. There, I had a hard time saying it again. And I'm just going to pick out, I think I'll pick out maybe, because I really don't need as many squares as I think I'm going to. So I think I'll pick out maybe 10 squares that I know that my friend would really like, and then we'll kind of incorporate from there. So here we are. I have all 10 of my squares picked out. The way that we're going to make them are actually quarter square triangles, and so we need a background square for each one of our picked out printed squares. With quarter square triangles, this will give me 40. I think that's too many for what the bag size I'm going to use, but I'd rather have extra left over that I can incorporate later in a scrap project than get to the end and not have enough and have to go back and restart our process. I love to chain piece. It just makes me think that things are going a lot quicker, and I just really like that aspect of quilting. And so what I'm going to do now is pair each one of these up with right sides facing together with a background square. So now I've got all of my little fabric and background pinned together, 2 5-inch squares, right sides facing together. Let me flip it over so you can see it on my mat. This is a smaller print line, and so I'm actually going to make quarter square triangles that will make them a little bit smaller. And the nice thing about that is, you know, that I don't have to use as many pieces of fabric as I would, let's say, if I were doing half square triangles. If you wanted to do half square triangles, it's very, very simple. You draw a line from one corner to the other corner, just a diagonal line. And then on your sewing machine, that's actually where you line your foot up. Your 1/4-inch foot, you're gonna sew on a 1/4 inch away from both sides of that line. That will give you, and then you're actually going to cut straight on that line, and that would open it up to make half square triangles. So let's say that your print isn't as small as mine. You know, this little passport is pretty little. So if I cut it into 1/4 inch, let's just look at a 1/4 inch here. See, I still get a rose, I get some shoes. I mean, I still get a pretty good representation of the fabric. But let's say, for instance, you have a larger print fabric like this one. This is just a scrap left over from a quilt I made a few months ago. I found this at Joann's, if anyone's wondering, because it is extremely cute to make for a baby girl. But let's say I had a big print like this. I'm not going to be able to quarter that up. I mean, that's going to unfortunately chop him up. So I need to be mindful of that. That's where you could make half square triangles instead of quarter square like we're going to do today. So with quarter square triangles, it's actually very simple. We're going to take this over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this shut all the way. We're not flipping it inside out. We're not doing anything like that. You're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around these squares. Just so we know, one more time, we're going to sew a 1/4 of an inch all the way around our square, completely enclosing it, which sounds a little bit crazy, but I promise it will work out because we're going to chop this up into some really cute triangles. With all of our squares sewn together, now we get to cut them apart and look at our beautiful 1/4 square triangles. So let's work with one at a time. So you've got your corners that you've sewn your 1/4 inch, and I'm going to work from this gray side so you can see the stitching. You are going to lay your ruler not at the corner of the fabric, but at the corner of your stitches, only because your fabric could have shifted a tiny bit or something like that. So you want to make sure that you have accurate straight cuts. So you are going to lay it at the corner of each stitch. And make a cut. Now, if you don't have this rotating cutting mat, you'll just want to hold your square together, make sure it stays lined up. But I've got this little mat, which is helpful. And then you just do the same thing, the opposite diagonal. And I'll show you what it turns out to be here in a second. Lining up my ruler. All right, so now we've got 4 1/4 square triangles. I hope I'm saying that right. As I'm saying it more and more, I'm thinking it's not the right name for that. But when you open them up, I mean, look how nice that square is going to be. And so, like I said, this fabric is a small enough print that it really showcases the line very nicely. So now what you need to do is go ahead and cut up all of your squares, however many you did. I did 10, so I'm going to end up having 4 of these little units. Now let's grab our pressing board. Guys, I just love the yellow and white pressing board. We're going to grab all of our squares here, and I'm going to press them open. I know that, like I said, that is unconventional. A lot of quilters don't like to do that. But I just really like the reduced bulk that it makes. So you're going to press them open. I like to finger press them open and then come back with the iron and do it again. So we're going to look at the size of our squares. And I'm going to trim these specific squares down to 3 inches. So you'll want a small enough ruler, and you are going to start laying it on a diagonal. The rotary mat comes in really nice for this because you are going to be turning so much. So let me get my things out of the way, lay this out here. And what I like to do is lay this on a 45-degree angle that's on my mat already. And then I'm going to actually use the corner, just the corner of my ruler, the 3-inch square. If you had a 3-inch square ruler, that would be perfect as well. But I have a 2-inch square and a 3.5-inch square, so neither one of them work for me. So you're actually going to flip that whichever way is easiest for you. And with this, to make sure that you are lined up with your 45-degree angle, I'm going to make sure that all of my 3 inches are inside my square that I'm cutting. And my ruler doesn't have a 45-degree angle, but that's okay because I can mark the center of these squares. I know these crosshairs that that's 45-degree angle. So now all I need to do is cut off these little hairs on each side. And here we go. Pick my ruler up very carefully. Spin my mat around and line it up again one more time. And this is going to give us our completed 3-inch lines here. Like this. Okay, so now I have a 3-inch half square, quarter square triangle. So there we go. Okay, so you're going to continue, go through all of your squares like this. I've got all of my squares cut to 3 inches exactly. The next process is a little bit different depending on what you're making it for. I told you the measurements of my iPad cover, but this is actually going to be a book kind of sleeve for a friend, and So I'm gonna take the dimensions of her book and know that I need to make it a little bit wider because I don't want the book to be too tight in there. I want it to be very universal, so as she reads the next book and the next book and the next book, they all kind of one by one fit into this case. So the dimensions of her current book are 1.5 inches thick by 5.5 wide and 8.5 long. And so what I'm going to do now is just kind of take my squares and lay those out, including a fold over sleeve, right? So we've got like this flap here. So I want this entire thing to, this portion here to be at least, I'd say probably 6 inches, but then you need to allow for seam allowances. And if I do a boxing on the end, you know, for the thickness of the book. And so I'm going to keep adding measurements for that. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of start by laying these out in a pattern that, you know, I kind of like, that I think she would like. I know it doesn't all fit in the frame, but I've got 3 kind of these diamond shapes, and I think I really like it. 3 on each side. It makes a nice long area, and I think it will look really cute when I start to quilt it. So depending on your size that you need, I just kind of had her guesstimate, like, what is a standard size of book that you read? She reads kind of this series that's that she really, really likes. So I think this will work really well. It'll be very universal for her. So now what I'm going to start doing is just sewing, you know, square to square. So we'll take row by row and we will kind of create these 4 patches that will be this design here. Then we'll sew 4 patches to each other. We should have 6 at that point. So let's head on over to the sewing machine and we'll get that finished. With 2 squares sewn together, now we're going to continue on with our 4 patches. So you'll just take 2 opposites and sew them together. I'm actually going to choose a different set because that's the exact same fabric and I want to make sure it's a good mixture. So let's get something different here. So I'm just going, still the same. Let's find one that's not the same. Let's see. Here we go. You're just going to take 2 of your pieces and sew them together like this, and that's going to make our 4 patches. So with my size bag, that's going to be 6 4 patches. So these will come together so quickly. I am going to put a pin right in the center so that I make sure our seams match up, and then I can just sew 1/4 inch all the way down to make 6 4 patches. Okay, let's get these pressed open. Now pressing these, my personal preference is that I just press them open. So I will set the seam here with my iron and then I will flip this open and press this seam with, I'll split the seam down the center. Here we go. And then I'll press it open. I'm not pushing or pulling on my fabric because I don't want to distort the seam at all. That's just my personal preference. The standard way for quilting patches is to either press them to one side or to the other, and that way everything kind of nests very nicely together. So I'm going to just start pressing these open. I absolutely love the 4 patch. I feel like as a beginner quilter, if you have the 4 patch, there are so many possibilities that you can be doing with new projects. I mean, you can build so many beautiful projects with an easy 4 patch. And here I've kind of showed you how to do a 4 patch with some half square triangles. And so that's really very simple. I feel like with the holidays coming up, it's really it's a great skill to have even as a beginner quilter. I mean, you can make some pretty amazing things. With 6 blocks made, now I'll just lay them out and continue to sew 4 patches to each other and then go down to the next line. So 4 patches to each other and continue to the third, and then I will sew these 2 rows to each other. With all of this pressed open, I'm loving how this gray looks against these really bright colors. It just makes them stand out that much more. So our next step in this process is to sew on our pocket. What I like to do is, I know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows of squares, and I like to go 2/3 of the way up. So that would be 4 squares up, and I want to measure my pocket to be that high from the bottom of my project to the 1, 2, 3, 4 rows up, just whatever your measurement is, about 2/3 of the way up. Because at the end, I am going to box mine, and that way her book can kind of fit in there nicely, but not too snug. So I'm just going to grab my scrap fabric. I decided to go with the yellow polka dots. I just really think it's going to make that pop and look very, very nice. The next thing that we need to do, again, is measure 2/3 of the way up. So I'm going to just roughly lay my piece here and know that I need to cut 2/3 of the way up. So I'm actually going to cut and give it 1/4 of an inch. So it looks like that is going to be, let me line it up and make sure that I give you the right measurements here. 1, 2, where are we at? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 and 1/4 is how I'm going to cut my pocket here. So I've got 13, and before I cut this, I'm really going to double, triple, quadruple check, because I want to make sure that all of my measurements are right, since I'm kind of just guesstimating here. Yeah, I'm going to move it up to about 10.5. I would rather my pocket be a little too big than a little too short. The next thing that we'll need to do is we are very simply just going to lay right sides together here, and we are going to sew all the way across here 1/4 inch away, and that kind of gives us our pocket that's now going to fold over our book and our batting and our lining. So I'm going to head over to the sewing machine and do that, and I will be right back. Let's see what else we need to do next. We need to cut our batting for this, and then we need to put our lining in, and then we quilt. And then after quilting, it's binding and sewing this puppy together, and it's finished. So, I mean, this project, like I said, goes very, very quickly. So I told you I was going to use that kind of thicker stabilizing foam on the inside, so it gives it a little bit of protection. And then I need to grab my lining fabric, so you'll want to do the same there. I'm going to trim this up just one more time to make sure that I'm straight. batting, you are going to want to cut it. So it's about, I'd say maybe a 1/2 inch all the way around, and that way you kind of have some stabilization. Now, unfortunately, mine's a little bit longer than the width of mine, so I'm gonna have to cut more than I really want to off of it, but that's all right because I can piece it together. So like I said, you just kind of want to line this up, and you just want, you can't see that, you just want a little bit of overhang, and that way as you're quilting it, it can kind of stretch and move on you a little bit. So I'm going to cut this out, and then we're going to cut our lining fabric. So I've chosen to do a red stripe for my lining. What I did is I lined that batting up to make sure that my lining was straight because it is lined. I want to make sure, you know, that they're not completely off. And then I've got my foam batting, and then I've got my piece, and I'm going to make sure that they're all straight together and lined up very well, and that all my seams are laying down nicely. Now, if you're using this foam stabilizer like I am, the adhesive doesn't work because this is it has a bit of plastic in it. That adhesive just does not work. It tends to eat the foam a little bit. So what I use is a I don't typically use safety pins, but for this project I'm going to have to. If you're just using regular batting, you can use 505 or whatever basting you prefer to use. So I'm just going to put safety pins in. I'm going to pour them out here, and I'm just going to put them in every few squares, and that way I've got this held down very tightly. With this pin basted, now I'll just head over to the sewing machine and I'll take a look at this and kind of look at what kind of quilting I want to do. I would suggest you can do whatever quilting you want, especially, you know, on the pocket. It's so open that it would be fun to do a nice design or something like that. But I would definitely stitch in the ditch along this seam line. It's going to really help that fold at the bottom very nicely. Even though we are going to box these corners, that will help the center really fold down nicely. So just kind of take that into consideration when you're doing your quilting. For my 4-patch design up here, I think that I'm going to do something, I'm not sure, I might do some, I'm not sure, something in this negative space here, and maybe leave these so that they pop open. I might stitch in the ditch so that they pop up a little more. That's what I might do. I might stitch in the ditch here and then stitch also around them, and then do something, maybe some free motion quilting here in these negative spaces. So it kind of, it really pushes these out. I think that she would really enjoy that. I think she would appreciate that hard work of free motion quilting. So how does your quilting look? Mine is all the way finished. I've got the front of my bag and then the pocket of my bag just straight line quilted. Now for the front of my bag, in these negative spaces, I did choose to do some freeform quilting. I've been practicing with this, and so I feel like I've gotten down these loops pretty well. So I'm so excited to really dive into free motion quilting and start practicing even more. So I chose to do some of the swirls and loops here in the negative spaces. And then within the quilted patterns here, I did some stitch in the ditch. And so that was really exciting to me to see that happen. Now here is the back. I did use a gray thread so you can see it quite a bit more. I think, again, I think the person that this is going to, I think that she's really going to appreciate that. She likes to quilt as well. And so I think that she'll really appreciate that. So our next thing to do is trim off your edges here. And so you'll want to trim that down to the size that you need. Make sure that everything is nice and straight. After that, we're going to attach our binding on our pocket first, because that is going to be enclosed, and so we need to make sure that that's all the way done. So go ahead and trim off all of your excess batting and backing. Okay, so our next portion is to sew our binding on the pocket. Now here's how our bag will fold down. We are going to box these corners here, so that will take up a little bit of this extra space down here. But you'll see that our binding here is actually going to be encased in the side binding and the side seam here, and so we need to get that done first. I've just chose a really cute pink gingham that I'm going to wrap around the corners, and I think that'll just be like a nice little accent. So I'm going to press that in half, and then just like we would do a typical binding, we're going to sew it to the front and wrap it around to the back, enclosing our seams. And look how nice that's going to look. I think I'm really going to enjoy that, and these bright fun colors are definitely something that she's going to enjoy. So I'm going to get that done and I'll meet you right back here. Look how cute this pink gingham binding is on this yellow polka dot. I absolutely love it. I think it's so cute. Okay, so our next process, you can do one of two things. If you don't want to box your corners and you just want it flat, like for an iPad or an e-reader or, oh my goodness, there's so many of them, like a Kindle Fire or whatever, you can leave them flat. And that's what I've done on this one. I've left it flat, and then I went ahead and bound it all the way from the corner here with finished edges all the way up and around. That's why we just did that encased binding. This is done as a separate piece so that it goes underneath your binding on these sides. Now, because I know that my friend will be using it for books that could be a little more thick, I'm going to give her a boxed edge. And what that means is from the inside, it's going to be boxed kind of like this, where it's going to give it a wider bottom. So if you don't want to give it the boxed edge, all you do is start from one side, sew 1/4 inch all the way down, the other side sew 1/4 inch all the way down, and then you bind it and you're finished. With the boxed edge, you actually want to flip it with the pocket right side facing, with the front right side facing, and you're going to sew it backwards. We are going to do the same thing, so you are going to sew 1/4 inch on each side, and then we'll turn it inside out. And that's where we'll get to our boxing. So at this point, if you're doing the box edge, just go ahead and sew 1/4 inch down each side just to the pocket. Make sure that you are backstitching at this top portion, because you don't want this to come undone when we turn it. Here we are with those 1/4 inch seam all the way down. Now you're going to flip it inside out and make sure that you've got all of your seam enclosed. Okay, now I should mention with this boxing method, it is going to create some raw seams on the inside, but you're going to have a nice finished bag. So you want to just look and make sure that all of your seams are enclosed, and mine are. So I'll flip it inside out one more time. Okay, now if you've ever boxed a corner before, we're doing it just the exact same way. This time, if you've never boxed a corner before, let me just tell you, it's so simple. And once you learn how to do it, you are going to be able to make so many bags and purses and different things that are going to be able to fit so many different things, because it is not as hard as it looks. I was intimidated by it for quite some time, but it really is just not as hard as it looks. So at the corner here you're going to want to trim all of these little threads. So I just like to take my rotary cutter and kind of go down the line here and make sure I don't have any. Okay. And you will need your cutting mat for this portion, and a type of marking pencil or friction pen or something. I just kind of like to eyeball it. So you're going to take your bag and kind of set it on its corner, okay? And you're going to open this up. Put your fingers in there where you're at the pinch. Now, do you see where my fold line is here? I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to make my seam and my fold line kind of stick together there, nest together, just like this, okay? And I'm going to fold my bag quite a bit, and you'll see that the other side just kind of naturally does that. And So you should kind of look like this. It looks like a little baby carriage. That's so cute. Okay, so what you're going to do now, one side at a time, this is where you need to determine how big you want your boxed edge. So I'm going to take mine and just kind of look at my measurement here. I think I'm going to go up, let me see, if I go up an inch, that kind of, I think I'm going to go up about, let me see, about 3/4 of an inch. And so I'm going to mark that with my pencil. I'm just going to mark a line all the way. Now, it really doesn't matter what kind of pen you use on this part because it is on the inside. You're not going to be able to see it. So let me grab my pencil here. This is just a quilter's pencil. So I'm just going to mark 3/4 of an inch on both sides, and it just happens to be that little seam allowance there. And I'm going to head over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew this, and I'm going to keep going back and forth just to really reinforce those corners. And then after that, I'm going to flip it over and do the exact same on this side, so I can actually go ahead and mark that if I'd like to. And I think I would, so it happens to be about that seam line too. And about this one as well. Okay. Okay, so let's head over to the sewing machine, and I'd like for you to come with me because I want you to see really how many times I go back and forth just to really reinforce those stitches. So let's head on over there and take a look. So we've got our corners here, and I've got our markings, and just kind of, I want to make sure that they're lined up again because moving from my cutting mat to my sewing machine, it kind of got a little jumbled, but that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to put it under my foot, and I still have my walking foot on from when I was quilting, when I was straight line quilting. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and over again. So let's see if we can make this happen. If you've used a stiff batting or stabilizer or anything like that, it is really bulky to get under your machine, but it can happen. What I typically like to do is kind of open up that side seam and lay it flat so that we just kind of go over it kind of slowly and in pieces. I sewed from one side over, back, over again, and then locked my stitches here in the end. So now I'll flip over to the other side, line that up again, and I will do the same exact thing. So I will stitch across, back, across again, and lock my stitches at the end. Now I'm going to trim just about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to eyeball that and just clip that right off. So that just kind of makes that really clean little edge there. I'll flip it over and I'll do the exact same thing on this side. Make sure that the other side of your bag is out of the way. Okay, so now we've gotten that. Now the exciting part is to flip it inside out and see kind of the bottom that you've created and how it stands up on its own. Really poke out those corners just like this. You can even stick, they have tools that you can kind of help turn, or you can stick your quilting pencil or anything in the corner there. In fact, I'm just going to use the end of my quilting pencil. Just make sure those corners are stuck out just like this, and on the other side. And look at that, your bag is just, that's just so cute. And so now a book will fit down in there very, very nicely. So it just kind of helps it to make it a little bit wider so that something can fit down inside there. Now the only thing left to do, look how adorable this is going to turn out. The only thing left to do is to add our binding. So I'm going to continue with this pink gingham fabric because I think it looks awesome. And I'm going to create a binding that I'm going to put all the way around, starting from one side with a finished edge. And when we get to the ironing board, I will show you that. We're going to miter this corner, swing all the way down, miter this corner, and with a finished edge, finish here. And that will conclude our bag. So let me grab our pressing board. and move some things out of the way here, and we will prepare our binding. Now, what I mean that you need to finish the edges is that you'll need to open this up here on the end. Put everything back together here. You're going to open this up on the end where you've pressed it, and you're just going to fold it down about 1/4 inch, and we're going to press that flat. I mean, it can be very, very minimal, just as long as it's a nice folded edge. Just press that into place. There we go. And then we're going to fold it back in half. Now, do you see how that took away our raw edge? Let me get my iron out of the way, and then you can see that. Okay, so that took away our raw edge. That's going to help look nicer on the end of the bag. You'll want to do that on both ends. What I suggest is waiting to do this other end until you've gotten your binding sewn on so you can have an exact measurement of where that end lands. So what I will do is I will head over to the sewing machine, and I'm gonna, I think I said before I'm gonna sew it to the front and wrap it around. I think for this I'm going to tuck it in here and then sew it from the inside and wrap it around to the front. I've got about 3 inches to go, so I'm going to stop and trim my binding. And that way I have plenty of room and space to press that seam with my fingers. I think it will be just fine. So again, I just want to take maybe 1/4 inch and fold it inward, and then fold it in half again, and that will create that finished edge on my binding. Now we'll just start from this opposite side, and we will fold over our binding. And let me kind of just show you. It's just going to fold over, and it's going to look very finished and I think very, very cute. So, and that kind of shows you where that finished edge really comes in handy. And just like that, our bag is finished. I am absolutely loving it. So it's got this nice finished binding, a finished binding here on the inside, and then of course our bag that our book will fit nicely into. I'm just so excited about this. I think that she's going to love it, and I think that it's very universal. She can use it for a lot. So if you all have any questions about this pattern or other patterns that we've been doing, or you'd like to hear more about our quilting journey here at Kia Bee, leave a comment down below and subscribe to our channel. And we just love interacting with you guys. We love talking quilting and having all new quilty friends. So thank you for joining us on the Hive today and taking it one stitch at a time. Have a great week.